Chapter 4. During the days that followed, light and work filled my thoughts, but when the shadows began to dull the colors of the paintings in the studio, and Melania began to shout about wasting oil and candles so that we would hurry to bed, I was overcome by an anguish that washed over me like a wave. It seemed pointless to ask more questions about the attic. The other boys knew less than I did. They didn't even seem to care. In order to find out what was up there, I would have to go on my own, and it would have to be at night. It was impossible to linger near the stairway during the day. If the maestro wasn't with us in the studio, we were never far from Melania's watchful gaze. It wasn't long before I decided one night to carry out my investigation. The moon was full, and everyone was sleeping. Melania had made her silent visit to the attic an hour or so earlier. The only sounds in the house were the familiar popping of the last logs on the fire and the maestro's snore, which echoed through the corridor. It was time to go upstairs. I got up quietly and waved to be sure that no one had heard me. I stepped away from the corner that served as my bedroom and stood at the bottom of the stairway. There were 5 steps that led to a small landing, then the staircase turned up to the attic. I held onto the rope that anchored to the wall, served as a banister, and slowly began to climb the stairs. I reached the first landing and peered through the shadows. I could make out another landing at the top and a large door just beyond it. When I reached the top, I leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. I had the sensation that my ears had grown, straining to hear any sounds. The door was black and studded with rusted nail heads. I held the latch down and pushed, but the door was locked. I tried looking through the keyhole, but it seemed to be blocked or covered from the other side. I was thinking about giving up when a shuffling sound made me jump. I grabbed onto the rope banister and considered running downstairs as fast as I could, yelling until I had awakened the whole household. Something held me back. I took another deep breath and turned to examine the wall next to the door. Something near the floor to the right of the door moved in the shadows. I held my breath. My heartbeat seemed loud enough to wake all of Florence. I bent down to get a closer look. It looked like a piece of fabric. I touched it. It was heavy, like a tapestry. But why was it moving? I mopped my brow and swallowed hard. Very slowly, I pulled back a corner of the tapestry and saw, about a foot off the floor, a small barred window that opened onto a room silvered by moonlight. The air that came through the bars smelled of acid dampness. I sat down on the floor and peered through the bars. The attic was a large, empty room with a barred window, which was open, letting in the moonlight and the cold of the street. There were no shelves or cupboards with alchemist's equipment against the wall, nor were there books or even a table or bench. I saw no bodies, ghosts, or dragons, just a pail, a dish, some rags, and on the wall a huge black iron ring and chain that reached a bundle of tattered blankets on the floor. The bundle was breathing. Mother of God, I thought. I tried to move, but my legs seemed to have stuck themselves to the floor. It was then that I heard a soft voice. "Who are you?" "Arduino," I answered. The bundle had spoken. It was a man. He pushed aside the blanket that covered his head, and the moonlight shone on his hair. Good night," I stammered and dropped the tapestry. "Wait," he cried. I couldn't move. "Arduino, please," he said. "Please don't go." His voice was that of a young man, only a few years older than me. I pulled back the tapestry again. He was sitting under the open window against the wall. The chain I had seen stretched across the room ended in a shackle around his ankle. "Thank you," he said when he saw me. So many questions crowded my thoughts that I couldn't say anything clearly. "Are you one of Cosimo's apprentices?" he asked. "Yes." "My name is Donato." Donato?" My voice cracked. "Why are you chained up in here?" "Because," he said, "I was foolish. Please tell me how are things downstairs. I only see Melania and she never speaks to me." I shrugged my shoulders. "I've only been here for a week," I answered. "I don't know if things are going well or badly." "Is there very much work?" "Not really, though they are finishing a panel and there's a drawing in progress." "There's nothing else?" he asked, sounding surprised. "Not that I know of." He leaned toward the barred window and pushed the hair out of his face. "Is there a specialist in the studio?" he asked. I had never heard of such a thing. "I don't think so," I said. He looked at me and smiled. "A specialist is an expert in one particular part of a painting. There are specialists in backgrounds, in hands, in the folds of tunics and hangings." "I've never seen any specialists," I answered. Marco does the backgrounds, and the maestro paints the rest. Marco is still here? He exclaimed softly. What about Raffaello? No. Aside from me and Marco, there's only Baldo and Piero. There are 4 of us altogether. They're new since I've been up here. Raffaello probably ran away after I was imprisoned. Why are you chained up in here? I asked again. There was a pause before he spoke. The maestro thought that I painted better than he did. I never felt that way. I thought he was a genius, but I wasn't clever enough to hide my talent. I had been his apprentice for 3 years and spoke openly about plans to open my own studio. He got hysterical when he heard about it. He couldn't bear the thought of competing with me for commissions. He said I was a traitor. I couldn't believe my ears. Could the maestro really be that jealous? How long have you been in here? I asked. Donato looked at some scratches on the wall near the iron ring. 14 months, he said, sighing. 14 months? I was stunned. How have you managed to stand it? What else could I do? He said. At the beginning I was desperate. I wouldn't eat what Melania brought up to me, but I was starving and nobody cared whether I ate or not. I yelled many times, but no one ever came. The wisest thing I could do was wait. What about the other boys? Marco and I weren't exactly friends, and Raffaello was quite timid. In any case, nobody sees, hears, or knows anything that Cosimo doesn't want him to. Even though you've only been here a short time, you should know that. It was true. No one contradicted the maestro. Apprentices are legally bound to obey their masters. But what about your family? I asked him. Haven't they looked for you? Donato took a deep breath and began his story. I have no family left. I was an orphan when I came to Cosimo. Both my parents and my sister had died several months earlier from a fever that I somehow survived. My father was a merchant and made good money, so when he was alive I was able to go to the best schools, where I studied art, the sciences, philosophy, and literature. But my father didn't have much savings, and when he died, most of what he did have was used to pay debts. I had always known that I wanted to be an artist, so after all the debts were paid, I used the money that was left for an apprenticeship. He paused, then continued. From the moment he had my money, Cosimo took full advantage of the fact that I was orphaned. He thought he owned me. I would never have been able to stand it for so long. I would have gone mad, I said. For a while, I thought I was going mad too. But little by little, I realized that losing my mind was useless. So was feeling sorry for myself. I decided to adapt to the situation, which is the only reason I've survived as long as I have. But you must be so lonely. I am very cold and hungry and lonely, and being lonely is the worst. But I also have time to think, and because of my window, I can see the sun and the moon and the birds. I even know when things are happening here in Florence. What do you mean? That window is so high up, you can't possibly see very much out of it. Of course not, Donato said, but I knew when it was Christmas because I could hear the noises of the market and smell the roasting meats, and I knew when it was Carnival because I heard the songs and the children shouting. San Lorenzo's bells tell me when it's Sunday or when there's a wedding or a funeral or a fire. He paused and wiped his face with the back of his hand. I've even managed to get used to living with spiders and mice. Ugh, I'd have died of fright, I said. Fright? Donato looked at me with surprise. Sometimes I think I'm a terrible coward, I said. The prisoner shifted against the wall. He sighed and said softly, You're the only boy who's dared to come up here. In 14 months. I don't believe you are a coward, even though you say so yourself. I'm still shaking. That doesn't mean anything. The moon, indifferent to our conversation, had moved across the sky, and now only a sliver of light came through the open window. It's getting very late, I said. I should go down to my bed. Stay just a little while longer, Arduino. It's been so long since I've talked to anyone. If you never talk to anyone, how have you managed to keep your voice? I asked. Thanks to the poetry that I remember from my studies, especially the work of Dante. As a student, I memorized many of the verses from his Commedia. In the past 14 months, I've repeated them countless times, savoring their sound, thinking about the meaning of the words, and meditating on their theme. I was mesmerized by his words, his story. The maestro's hoarse cough in the distance startled us both. I have to go, I said, panicked. If he finds me up here, who knows what he'll do? Will you visit me again? I hesitated. I couldn't think about anything except getting downstairs. Well, his sad gaze helped me decide. Yes, I will come back as soon as I can.